Hello, everyone. Great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us on Tech and Innovation Day. You just saw me talking to Chairman Ajit Pai, talking about some exciting issues with broadband, telehealth, closing the digital divide. We talked a little bit about permissionless innovation, and like he said, we have the man who wrote the book on permissionless innovation. Adam Thierer is going to be joining us. We have Eric Fulton from the Frontier Policy Center, a great entrepreneur, and Benjamin Hart from the Utah's Governor's Office of Economic Development. We're going to have a great conversation today, so thank you so much for joining us. I'm looking forward to it. Again, if you have any questions, please drop them in. I will be happy to ask them because we have some great guests. So let's get going and introduce our guests. Hey, Adam, how are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
We're great. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. We got a great plug for your book, Permissionless Innovation, from former FCC Chairman Ajit Pai. Eric, how are you doing up in Montana today?
Oh, having a great sunny morning. Sounds like you guys have some less good weather this morning.
Yeah, it is certainly storming throughout most of Louisiana today. So it looks like no Tulane and LSU baseball today. Very disappointing, I know, for a lot of people in the Pelican State. And Ben, how are you doing out in Utah?
Doing well. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay.
Yep, we sure got you. We can hear you great. Again, we can thank former Chairman Ajit Pai for making this possible, this great connection. So one of the things I want to start with for Adam, right? We kind of pumped up your book, Permissionless Innovation, which you can go buy on Amazon right now. Help out our guests, but talk to us a little bit kind of about that concept. Why is it so important for policymakers and state lawmakers to and kind of internalize?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Eric, and congratulations on the summit. And former Chairman Ajit Pai really stole some of my thunder, but I have to thank him for it because he's been a great promoter of the idea of permissionless innovation, which generally just stands for the proposition that we should allow a general freedom to experiment and tinker with new ideas and concepts and let the genius of human creativity in our minds run wild and see what happens. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that we live in a world of anarchy. We should have no rules. Permissionless innovation is a concept that basically can be couched within a broader tradition of classical liberalism. And it's an understanding or a belief that it's better to give innovative minds and entrepreneurs more green lights than red ones. When political scientists, historians, economists study what drives or propels economic growth, they almost uniformly come back to the idea of technological innovation as sort of a prime mover in human betterment. Well, what incentivizes or allows for that to happen? It's a proper innovation culture, as economic historians call it. And innovation culture really comes down to the set of elements that go into making policy and an economy run. And it really depends upon a favorable disposition towards entrepreneurialism and the sort of spark of innovation. That's what permissionless innovation is all about. And it's so essential that we get this right because this has to do with the sort of competitive standings of states and nations as we face so many challenges internationally now on the innovation policy front.
Yeah, you hit on a great concept of kind of competition between states. So I want to go to Ben. Utah has been great at that competition. You had some of the fewest job losses during the pandemic. And one of the reasons is because you've taken that permissionless innovation kind of to heart, but you're doing something really interesting that we've alluded to called sandboxes. Can you kind of explain what that concept is for all our viewers?
Yes, absolutely. And Eric, thank you for the opportunity to be part of the panel today, and also to Eric and to Adam to be on the panel with you. It's a pleasure. And so, so just a little bit about kind of sandboxes and what we're doing here in the state of Utah. I think Adam set that up very, very well. In fact, as we look into the next generation of how we recruit businesses to the country and to the state, incentives are becoming less and less important. And it really is more about where are we giving people a really fertile ground to set their business down. And so we've seen the companies are already flocking out of those states that are really, really difficult to do business in. And it's not just about a monetary loss. I think that's part of it, but it's also about a regulatory framework that just doesn't work. And so what we've been piloting on a little bit of a smaller scale, and now we're ready to really open it up, is the sandbox concept. And so what we've done so far, we've had open a fintech sandbox, an insurance sandbox, and a legal sandbox. So those have been open for the last 2 to 3 years now. Some of them have been used, some of them have been used less so. But now with this most recent legislation, it is open statewide across all statewide regulation. And so what it really allows us to do is if there's some feature, regulation, whatever it may be, that's burdensome for innovation and technology, it allows the business to bring that application in front of an 11-member commission. And that commission then has the ability to waive and provide relief for up to 12 months for that specific and targeted regulation. Obviously, if it's something that's health and public safety related, we would be a little bit reticent to grant relief towards something like that. But what we see happening with this is it really allows innovators who need that flexibility in that space to be successful, yet there may be some feature of the Utah regulation, code, rule, policy, legislation, statute, whatever it may be, that we need to take a look at and make sure that it's not being an impediment. And so that really is what the sandbox does. We're excited for this. We're going to be setting up this bigger sandbox for the next couple months. And by July 1, we want a fully functioning, totally comprehensive sandbox for the entire state.
Wow, that is some exciting stuff going on in Utah. Again, kind of leading the nation in this permissionless innovation structure. In Louisiana, we're about to have our legislative session. We're going to have a fintech sandbox, Representative Mark Wright, and an insurance sandbox brought by Senator Robert Mills. We're very excited to see where those bills go. Eric, I want to go to you. We've got a lot of great policy people on today, but the reason I wanted you on is you're an actual tech entrepreneur. You started your own business. You've done some great stuff. When you're looking to start up a business, specifically in the tech space, what do you look for? Like, why are you on Montana, or why are you in Utah? What are some of those like key factors?
Absolutely, Eric.
For
great question,
and
I find them in very good company. I look longingly towards Utah with their business-friendly policies. Montana too has good business-friendly policies, but it's nowhere as progressive as it could be in releasing government restriction, preventing businesses from flourishing. So I'd say largely I'm in Montana because I love this state, but if I were truly starting a tech company with a clean slate and no care of where I lived, I'd look for the best business climate to operate in. And I would argue what that is, there's a fire triangle for new businesses to start up, and that is access to talent, access to capital, and I don't want to say regulatory free environment, but to operate with infrastructure to succeed, whether it be co-working spaces, more lenient policies, et cetera, so that the business can focus on what it does best, creating commerce, creating software, whatever it may be, without the hindrance and burden of things that aren't directly attached to the business's core focus.
So you've actually done. Tell our viewers a little bit about the business that you actually have started, and what were some of the regulatory barriers that you had to deal with?
Yeah, right
starting
now,
up the business.
I helped co-found a global consultancy that has over 40 employees in the telecom space. But my first business, I think, was my PhD of small business, and it's not something that you can get in the classroom. And it was very much an uphill battle. A great story. That first business was an internet service provider, and I don't want to say who starts an internet service provider, but it was a big business to start in the mid to late 90s. And in 2013, I thought, you know what, internet in Montana could be better. And the very first thing I discovered is there were barriers to entry every part along the way for me to try and improve the service in Montana. From even installing fiber optics in the ground to doing fixed wireless to different homes, there's barrier after barrier after barrier. And I actually had to get quite creative with it. Our city council said, well, we've already sold the cable franchise and you don't have a chance on that. And to be a telco, you have to follow all of these rules and regulations. We would have had to hire 5 people just to maintain the rules and regulations that a large telco could already do. And it turns out what we had to do was leverage a loophole. And that is, in the Montana Constitution, there is a right to access to install fiber optics or any utility cable for a telegraph company. And so rather than having a business-friendly climate, what we had to do was look for a loophole in the rules that basically said, hey, if you're a telegraph company, you can install communication cables to people's homes. And that was the only way that we were going to do it. So we changed our name, we changed our regulation. We actually called the FCC, and they kind of giggled when they said, you want to be a telegraph company? But in the end, what it allowed us to do is to get asynchronous gigabit services to our customers, which at the time I felt was a kind of core foundation to a technology employee working in Montana. Access to high quality internet is foundational to having conversations like these, to remote work. And it was definitely a lesson in being careful with both the industry that I pick and the regulations around it, because government has had a chance to build up over the last few hundred years. And it's always easy to add a law, and it seems they're less inclined to remove laws, even when they don't make sense.
Yeah, always government, always growing, always adding more red tape. Adam, again, I think you've been set up perfectly for your new book, Evasive Entrepreneurs. It's exactly what Eric Fulton is talking about there, having to find a loophole. So what is that book about, and why is it so important, kind of the future competition that
sure. Thanks for plugging the book. So Evasive Entrepreneurs are basically just people who put permissionless innovation into action. You know, there's so much foot dragging in the policy world these days, and government is so slow to adapt. You know, just to cite one statistic, the consultancy Deloitte did a survey a couple of years back of just the federal code, and to try to review how often were federal rules and regulations revised. And they found that 85% of the US code had never been revised or only been revised once. 85%. This tells me that sort of once rules get in place, they're sort of locked in. They get crusty and old and don't adapt to the times. And so we have crazy rules in the books. There are localities in America that still have rules in the book from the early 80s that ban people from walking down the streets playing their Walkman, their Sony Walkman. Well, does that mean I can't wear headphones when I listen to my iPhone today? It's insanity. There are rules that say women, if they're driving cars in some communities, men have to warn in front of them with red flags and wave red flags to warn people that a woman's driving. It's insanity, right? We would never think that those are smart or just rules. And a lot of innovators face rules like this every day, and they always try to play by the book and do the right thing, but sometimes they push back. And whether they're utilizing new technologies like 3D printers or virtual reality or AI or all sorts of other new innovations like blockchain and Bitcoin, a lot of innovators push up against the margins of what regulation and licensing will allow. And we saw a lot of this during the COVID crisis. And these sort of innovators, which I again refer to as evasive entrepreneurs, they push back against illogical, old, crusty policies that are anti-consumer and anti-welfare. And that's really what's happening, I think, across the board on the horizons of technological innovation today. Our first best choice is always to rely on policy reform. I want to get this absolutely clear. I have worked in the policy trenches for 30 years, trying to get logical reforms to licensing laws, regulatory barriers, tax issues. It's a challenge we have to keep trying to embrace and fight. But we also know that technology can play a role and give rise to greater voice and exit opportunities for us to try to find new ways to break the log jam that politics sometimes imposes. And just a final word on this, the reason this is so important to link what Eric and Ben said a moment ago, and what Ajit referred to earlier in his comments, is that when he talked about digital federalism and the movement of people around, and he told that great story about the mayor of Miami and others, you know, we live in a world of innovation arbitrage. Innovation increasingly moves around to where it is treated most hospitably. And this is why it's so important what's happening in Utah and other states, because they're recognizing, the policymakers are recognizing, we need to do something to break this logjam and to free things up a bit, give more green lights than red ones, especially as innovators are pushing back against policies quite aggressively these days, or they're just leaving town, or in worst case, leaving the country. And we don't want that. We want homegrown innovators to stay at home, right? This is what America's benefit has been over the last quarter century. We won the digital revolution. And I always give this talk to law schools, and I say, how many people in here can name a major innovator based in Europe today? Just anyone, name one. There's a lot of silence. Somebody usually says Skype. And I said, Skype was bought by an American company like 10 years ago and changed hands twice. And then I'll say something like Spotify. And it's like, okay, I'll give you Spotify. Anything else? And the answer is no. All of the world's great innovators in the digital space are American companies. our companies are the envy of the world, despite the so-called techlash we see happening in America today. The reality is everybody in the rest of the world would die to have the companies and innovators we have. We need to grow more of them, have more of that competition innovation. We're only going to get it if we get our policies right. And if we don't, innovators are going to push back or they're going to leave.
Yeah, so Adam, you hit it on a really important point, that innovation arbitrage. Companies are going to go where they kind of run into the fewest barriers. And Utah has been one of those states to really take advantage of that. You guys have the Silicon Slopes, a lot of great kind of tech startups. What has been your way to sort of attract these companies? Like you said, the kind of, we're going to give you a tax break to come here doesn't really work anymore. And it's probably not a great way to get innovative companies, because the people taking advantage of tax breaks are sort of the larger companies that have lawyers that can figure these sorts of things out. So what has been Utah's model to bring in all these innovative people?
That Adam said, I thought that the way he phrased some of those thoughts were perfect. It really is a policy battle. And some of it, we just stand on the California border and just say, we're Utah this way. I mean, it's getting to that point in California. Obviously, they're losing population, they're losing businesses. People are looking for a better place to do business. It's not a hard sell. And Adam said, we don't have to, and Eric, to your point, we don't have to be offering a ton of money. It really is, we just need a better place to be doing business. And that really is I think, one of our best selling points. And so Utah over the last decade, and Eric Fulton, thank you for the call out. We love the good work you're doing up in Montana, and we love Montana too. Great, beautiful part of the country. But one of the things we've been able to really, really key in on is tech. And I think, Eric, you alluded to our Silicon Slopes, as we call it here colloquially, but it really is this mass that has emerged. And it's not just about, and I think this is really where this conversation is important, but it's not just about tech in general, but it's really these subsectors of tech. And so things like defense tech, which a lot of people don't talk about, but in the northern part of our state around Hill Air Force Base, we've got one of the more sophisticated defense tech clusters, throughout the country and maybe even throughout the world, with Northrop Grumman and their establishment of a new defense program, and the F-35 coming online as well, which has more tech in it than any previous warfighter. And then, we talk a lot about family history in the state of Utah, just because of the local culture and religion. But even there with the roots tech, as we call it, I mean, a lot of family history tech related to not only our DNA and our genealogy, but also our health. And so you look at all these little subsectors of tech, and it really, really is incredible. And that's where our strong growth is coming from. But if you're not in tune with those industries and what they need and what they're trying to do, then you ultimately start to exclude them. And so one of the things that we've done proactively is we went back and looked through our books. This was kind of the precursor to doing some of the sandboxes. But I think, as Adam said, that, well, they've never done this on the federal level. And thus you have the train wreck that is the federal regulatory. If anyone's ever tried to delve into the CFR, oh my goodness, it's painful. So we went through and we looked through about 1,200 of our regulations, rules, policies, whatever it was, and we ended up removing about 300 of them that we felt like didn't need to be there, didn't really serve a public purpose. And I think being proactive in that way has really allowed us to be more welcoming. But you even talk about what it takes to build a house. I have a brother trying to build a house in California right now. You talk about that even on the local level versus here in the state of Utah. I mean, it's completely different in terms of having to hire an attorney, having to hire a whole lot of people just to get a permit to build a house. And so I think being able to be friendly kind of in the entire ecosystem really does help us welcome in a lot of these folks. And Eric, you said it. I mean, we lost fewer jobs, I think, than anywhere else. We've been able to weather this pandemic. And I would also add, we also have the lowest mortality rate in the country as well. I think a lot of that comes back to a really good culture in terms of health and wellness and a young population as well. But I think we've weathered this pandemic storm really well. And economically, we're already, we haven't seen the latest numbers, but we think we're going to be below 3% unemployment with our next numbers, and also a higher labor force participation rate. And that's because people have jobs that they want to go back to. They don't have to depend as much on the federal programs that are really, really kind of keeping some of these communities and peoples afloat right now. And so it is a good storm to be in, but again, it all comes back to these decisions to remove those barriers, be business friendly, have a safe environment for sure, but be welcoming to business and all types of innovation.
Yeah, well, what a pitch for Utah right there. Goodness, I kind of want to move there outside of I don't really like the snow too much. But yeah, you talk about under 3% in Louisiana. We're at 7.6%. Even before the pandemic, we're about 5%. These are just not good numbers. So we talk about the innovation, the business-friendly attitude, pulling back that red tape and regulations. You guys have figured out, and there's a lot us in Louisiana can learn from here. Eric, I want to get a little bit kind of into the startup. Ben hit a great kind of point. You have to hire a lawyer out in California to build a house. There's been a lot of talk about more tech regulations. We need to rein in tech. Talk a little bit about what those regulations do to kind of that startup culture, that startup mentality, where it's really hard to raise money. You might not have a lawyer on staff. What's kind of the realistic
I think very clearly
those,
it can be
regulations?
said, regulations ruin innovation. Plain and simple. Part of the reason why tech and the internet at large have succeeded and flourished so much is that it's largely I don't want to say lawless place, but it's it's open to innovation. And as soon as we start applying regulations, as soon as we start doing things like removing safe harbor, as soon as we start trying to make it so that you can only play if you already have enough chips at the table, then it removes any opportunity for new players to enter. And so I would say a free market is an efficient market, and the more layers that you add to that only make it harder for people to join and to start. And really, it creates this walled garden effect. So right now, we're already seeing that sort of happen in that if safe harbor, let's say, were to be repealed, and the safe harbor law basically says if you're a content provider, you're not liable for the content that's provided or posted on your website. Someone like Facebook can just, what?
Also known as Section.
Oh, yeah.
It's also known as Section 3,
yes.
but a lot of people might know it as.
And if you're Facebook and you're already, or Apple or Google, you already have $1 billion. What's writing a check for a couple 100,000, even 10,000 content moderators? It's chalked up to cost of doing business, and you're building a moat around yourself, so it's harder for people to compete with you. Whereas if you're someone that's just starting up, trying to start a new website, you don't have that same opportunity. And so by creating a fertile ground for entrepreneurs to succeed, you really are helping the economy, and you're helping create jobs. And any additional regulations remove that. I would say, personally, the reason California is so successful right now is inertia. I mean, they had JPL at the very beginning, and then that grew into HP and Intel. And what that did was it created two very high levels of inertia for both finance. There's a lot of capital, people who made money decades ago that are willing to reinvest without an opportunity for return, known as angel investors or venture capitalists. And then you also have an extreme amount of talent. So in Montana, when I was trying to learn Linux, in the early 2000s, I had maybe one or two people I could ask in a library book. Whereas in California, throw a stone somewhere in Palo Alto and you'll probably get someone with extreme knowledge on operating systems and modern technology that's being used to power the websites of today. But one of the silver linings of the pandemic and of COVID-19 are people that moved to California for the tech and for that fertile ground largely moved to states that had lower regulations and restrictions during COVID, and are realizing they're getting a quality of life increase. I can definitely say I love living in Montana. I think the people that live in Louisiana choose to live there because they love it. And same for Utah. Same for many of the states across our country. I'm sure there's people that love California for what it provides in terms of nature and culture, but I would not start a company in California personally at this time, because the regulations are so extreme, because housing is untenable, because I don't think I would live a lifestyle that I would want. And conversely, it's no longer the desert that it once was in other states. You'll have people that were engineers at Facebook and Google and Apple that were in San Francisco, and now they're local resources. Just at the coffee shop the other day, I heard the lady that's in charge of Apple Maps lives in Bozeman, Montana. Who would think that in a small town of Montana, you'd have someone that has the engineering chops to lead such a complicated product. And because she's there, because she has children there, because in her free time she provides that expertise, because maybe, you know, we have a great frontier group called Frontier Capital, sorry, a great VC group called Frontier Capital that's starting to invest in companies that start in Montana and the West. We're seeing these opportunities rise, and I think it's only going to get better because there's more access to talent, because state governments are realizing, hey, we can create opportunities for these businesses. And probably the other thing is states are getting smarter about it. 10 years ago, I think one of the things I run into in Montana is when I say, I want to start a new business and I walk into a bank or an economic development firm, they say, oh, is it a restaurant? Is it a hair salon? Is it something in manufacturing? And it takes a very different mindset to understand how to provide resources to tech firms versus traditional firms. And the states that figure that out faster are going to be the ones that attract talent and capital and build their own fire triangles of success.
Yeah, talking about really some exciting stuff. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. I would be happy to ask them. Adam, you're kind of a future-looking guy, so I'm going to ask you to get your magic 8-ball, shake it. We've talked a little bit about how we have the most mobile workforce we've probably ever seen. We've seen this great disruption due to COVID-19. A lot of tech companies are saying we're going to go remote kind of totally, right? You'll never have to go back to our giant office in Palo Alto that they spend millions of dollars on. What do you think is next for tech? Is it going to places like Texas, where Tesla's gone, where Oracle's gone? Or is it going to be more dispersed to places like Montana, to places like Utah,
that's
and
a great
hopefully
question.
places like Louisiana?
Eric Fulton's excellent comments. I agree that California's had a lot of inertia. They had a sort of an earlier start than a lot of other states and areas. They benefited from having what is known in the literature as a tech cluster. They had a cluster of really bright firms and people, along with really important university infrastructure, and probably most importantly, an investment base and a bunch of investors and capital that were willing to take risks on new ideas coming from these individuals and institutions. That is a really, really unique trifecta, a sort of a cocktail of innovation. And clearly not every area has that exact same advantage. But most states do have places where this can happen. And it has happened. It's happened in Boston. It's happened right by where I live in Tyson's, Virginia, Tyson's Corner, Virginia. And then it sort of fades away at times, both because of policy or investors leaving or whatever else. But we can take steps. Policymakers in Louisiana and other states can take steps to try to attract more of these investors and other people and companies. And because we live in a world of innovation arbitrage, they will come if you get the policy sort of predicates correct. If you get the base ideas right, the policies. Now, this leads to a very tricky debate. And this is one that we're confronted with today in a major way, especially with the growth again of ideas about industrial policy. And of course, economic development efforts have been hot at the state level for many, many, many years. And there's a lot of failure. You look at the Foxconn example in Wisconsin, among others, and it just doesn't play out well when you try very highly targeted focus efforts. And it's because policymakers want to believe that there's sort of like a Goldilocks formula of getting it just right. You know, we can just dial it in and it's a proverbial machine where we pull levers. That's not the way innovation and investment works. It's better to have sort of like basic level things right. You get sort of low, steady taxes, no surprises. You get regulatory reform. You get sort of a limitation on licensing, occupational licensing, and other sort of barriers to entry, as Eric pointed out. And some of this is very sectoral specific, but some of it's very general. And the best hope I think I have in the wake of COVID is that we finally recognized during the COVID crisis that these rules were a problem. And left and right across America, thousands of rules started being either sunset or paused temporarily because policymakers recognized how they were getting in the way of innovative responses to the coronavirus crisis. So much so that my colleagues and I at the Mercatus Center at George Mason proposed the idea that states take up what we call fresh start initiatives to say, hey, how about we do an evaluation of all the rules we paused or sunset during the crisis? And we just start with the presumption that they must have been pretty bad. They must have been, illogical if we had to pause them during the most serious crisis of our lifetimes. And then we reevaluate and we consider what was our experience without the rules on the books for a year. Better or worse? I think in most cases, people find it's better, right? Why do I need a license to make hand sanitizer? Why do I have to go through that whole rigmarole? The basic things like that need to be reevaluated. And then more generally, we can apply these lessons in terms of looking at licensing barriers and other sort of regulatory barriers or tax barriers and figuring out how we can bring them down. And that then begins to give us a reason or an ability to attract more capital, investment, and companies to our states and communities. Louisiana has many great universities, and there are ways to attract and build on the base of knowledge and infrastructure and investment that's already been made in those campuses and those universities. And that begins to give us the idea of sort of like a technology hub where we can develop these things. And then you marry this up with Ben's ideas, and what's happening in Utah about sandboxing. And you give the idea of like chances to experiment, little patches of freedom in a broader world of regulation. And let's see what works. Again, this is not clear cutting of all regulation. It's giving more green lights than red ones, giving some more freedom, because California has stopped doing that. They've just basically said, no, we're raising the barriers now. We're raising taxes. We're increasing regulations. Only because they have that inertia that Eric mentioned, they're holding on to the benefits they've already had, but they're squandering them. They're going to become like Europe. Again, you can't find these innovators and investors in Europe. There is no venture capital industry for all intents and purposes in the European Union. They all came here starting in about 95. And that's the importance of getting a vision of innovation culture based around permissionless innovation.
Yeah, you hit on some really important points right there. I'm going to plug our telehealth paper. Since some of those regulations have been lifted, we've had 2,200 doctors who either came into the state or offer telehealth services. You'll be able to read the whole paper next week. But again, just a few kind of policy changes on the edge had huge outcomes when we needed doctors the most, especially when Louisiana and New Orleans specifically were kind of COVID hotspots. Ben, I want to get to you. We talked about this really exciting idea of clustering, right? Like Eric Fulton talked about, he needed somebody that knew Linux, but he didn't know where to go. But if you've got that Silicon Slope, you can find somebody that has whatever that specialized skill set. How has Utah been so effective at creating that Silicon Slope and that cluster of venture capital, human capital, and good regulatory structure?
To, I think, kind of the DNA that we have here in Utah. It is very entrepreneurship friendly. I think it's one of those things that we've always put an emphasis on over the years. But I think there's also and I don't want to turn into a California bashing session, but I might, because I'm Utah. It's funny that you see the pendulum swinging back, and we talk about capital. The line used to be, look, unless you're in Silicon Valley, you're not going to get funding. You're not going to get capital. I think, and this may be too bold, but I think we're going to see a day, because the pendulum's already swinging, where capital is going to say, you're not going to be able to be successful unless you're out of California. Like, I think we're literally swinging back that far. We're not there yet, obviously, but I think that's where things are headed right now. And so I think when people have been looking for new places to really take business to, I think they've been looking for a good regulatory environment. I think they've been looking for cost that's friendly as well. There's no question about that. But also, I think the concept that Adam was talking about, it's just the good old-fashioned clusters that we try and focus on in economic development. And sometimes those actually work. Sometimes they don't. But I think when we say, okay, we're really going to put all of our emphasis, a lot of emphasis on how do we grow one industry, a lot of it, and Eric said this so well, but a lot of it comes back to things like workforce. And that is so critical more than anything else. And Adam described the what needs to go, that was, things that were eliminated during the pandemic that should stay gone. But I think Eric's point about talent, we have seen a mass, I'm not going to say exodus from a place, but I am going to say a lot of people moving in that bring that talent. And so when you need to find that right person, and it's funny because we hear the tech community a lot, they say, I have workforce issues. And a lot of times to a policymaker, we think quantity. But what it really is no, I need that one person with 10 years experience overseeing a specific, tech duty. And so I think more and more seeing the talent leave and come to places like Utah, to Montana, to Texas. I mean, there's zero question in my mind that people are now moving to where they want to be and not, where they have to be, and they're tied to employment. And I think Louisiana is going to absolutely benefit from this as well. So in some ways, it becomes that talent attraction as well. But again, that comes back to, are you a good place that's got a quality of life that people want to be, or are you regulatorily overburdened into, not even a place where people want to be living their life? And so I think the regulatory environment affects us on so many different levels. And I think when you've got a good environment, we've got a great quality of life, and we're not going to tax you to death in Utah. You can really have a tremendous quality of life without having to make $1 million a year. Attractive to a lot of people who are living in mobile homes in Silicon Valley because they can't find a place to live, or they're living in their Tesla. We hear those stories all the time. And so, if you can come and get a nice house in a great neighborhood in a school district that's, in one of the best in the country, we hope, and a higher education system that's a great system in the country as well. And so your kids are potentially in a good spot, or your family, or whatever you're looking for. Like, those are the things that matter to people. I think the idea of what Silicon Valley was is the history of tech. I think what we're seeing happen in the Rocky Mountains, Idaho, Montana, and hopefully Louisiana and these other places is the future of tech, without question. And I think Silicon Valley is again where things have been. And so, but again, it comes back to how welcoming is that regulatory environment. It's not the only thing, but on so many levels, it does matter. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you hit on some great points. Obviously, today is Tech and Innovation Day, and we're so excited to be talking about that. But yesterday, we talked about taxes, right? Louisiana getting its tax code right. We have one of the most complex tax codes in the country. One of the reasons we need to do a centralized sales tax is because companies like Amazon, kind of remote sellers, and figuring out these sorts of things has been new. Tomorrow, we're going to have a great panel on education, obviously really important for quality of life. If I want to move somewhere, I want to make sure that my kid has access to a school that fits their needs. So we'll be kind of hitting on that tomorrow. Eric, I want to kind of get back to you. Again, your experience as an entrepreneur is so important, I think, to listen to you and see what's going on. If you were to make a change in Montana that you think could bring in more entrepreneurs, more people willing to move there and give out their time and talent, or rather to invest in a company in Montana,
I think the
what change
ongoing
would you
local
make?
Montanan phrase is, "Shh, don't tell anyone about Montana." And I do have to comment, Ben. I think the phrase "they can't find a home, so they have to live in their Tesla" is such a funny phrase that's highly specific to one state. And not to rag on them, California had great innovation, great growth, and I think a lot of their thoughts are well intentioned, but we're seeing that it turns out in execution, it's not playing out in a way that's beneficial to the people that live there. So to answer your question more directly, Eric, what would I like to see in Montana? I think one of the biggest struggles that we have, I've definitely kept my eye on Utah. I think Ben is being a bit humble. When you drive south of Salt Lake, it's a who's who of Silicon Valley that looks like they've got one foot moving into Utah with Adobe, with social finance, with other tech companies just building after building. I think the probably biggest struggle will be access to talent. I know our state is working to fix that, but it's still got a long way to go, because for a lot of states like Montana, if you go to Montana State University probably has the largest computer science program in our state. A lot of those students are immediately poached with bigger salaries, and honestly, the little bit of the reputation and the grandiose ability to say, I work for Google or I work for Amazon. But the problem is, for those companies, they have no presence in Montana, which means that talent is leaving the state. So one of the key things is, and this is kind of what has started to turn the tide for Montana, just as a case study, is there was a company called Right Now Technologies. Our current governor actually helped found that company, or founded that company, and Right Now was bought by Oracle. And Oracle decided to keep their office in Bozeman, and that acted as a lightning rod for new capital flooded into the Bozeman area, because you have all these early employees that now have excess capital that they want to reinvest in their own ideas, and they also want to continue living in Bozeman, so they're self-funding their own startups. But then what it's also done is it's created innovative companies that are exciting enough and compelling enough for those students that are at the top of their program in the computer science facility to go, Google is great, but not so great that I'm willing to move to Palo Alto or to Mountain View. Instead, I would love to work for an Oracle who has an office here. I'd like to work for any number of our like Social Finance Corporation, Montana homegrown companies, Onyx Maps. We have a number of our own local unicorns, Figure in Helena. And so as we get more and more tech in our state, we're building up our own, at least, employment opportunity from those companies that retains talent. And now that we're retaining talent, instead of that faucet going to California or New York or Austin, that talent's staying. And then I hope at a certain point in the future, as these companies exit and as they pay great salaries, this talent then decides that they can execute on their own independent vision. And to do that, as we've already talked about so much during this webcast, less regulation, opportunity, and access to capital and infrastructure, both in, hey, I've built a company that's making money, I need to hire people. Now I can, because there's people to my left and right that are skilled and knowledgeable enough to be able to be employed. And then the last part is kind of, I think the best way to phrase it is community infrastructure, which, Montana might be late to the game. We don't have any WeWorks in the entire state, I don't believe. But we do have local co-working spaces. There's one called the Sidecar in Helena, Montana, that has acted again as a lightning rod for these independent people that were working for Pinterest, that were working for Google. Suddenly they're working in the same environment and they're going, hey, we're working for these great large companies, but our skills combined, we could create something that benefits us, our community, and sustains a lifestyle to where we don't have to work for Google. And not only that, as it grows, they hire additional local people to help fill out the skills they need necessary. So I kind of see, at least from a Montana perspective, we're there and we're headed towards the ball. And again, I look envious towards states like Utah that they're a little bit further down the track, to where, as a person, I like to live somewhere where there's mountains, where there's less people, and I can do that because I've got internet, I've got potential access to capital, and I've got access to future colleagues if I build something that's successful.
Yeah, I can say we have absolutely no mountains in the state of Louisiana. We have got a lot of great other stuff. But I think you hit on a really important point of human capital. We have some great universities here in the state of Louisiana, but they need somewhere to go work, somewhere that they can, get their skills and kind of build up. So Adam, I kind of want to finish up with you. We've seen this massive change due to COVID-19. The workforce is mobile. We've talked a little bit about that human capital, but we've also seen how important tech is. So what do you think the future of tech is broadly in this country? Are we going to realize how important tech is, kind of embrace that missionless innovation structure, or are we going to kind of go and start regulating? There's been a lot of talk at Washington or other state capitals that maybe tech has become too important in our lives. And
that's a great question about where our innovation culture will end up in another 5 to 10 years. And we do stand at a bit of a crossroads, and I am a little bit worried right now, not just because of the so-called techlash, but because societal attitudes in general are sort of souring on progress and innovation more generally. One of the things I didn't think I'd need to really sort of relitigate in my life is the idea that technological innovation is a net good. And yet when I survey the state of literature and academic writing on technology and innovation these days, there's an open hostility to the idea that progress per se is a good thing, which is astounding to me. Economic growth, technological progress, these are what drive human betterment. But a lot of people think differently, and that's troubling to me. At the same time, despite the fact that that attitude exists, there is clearly a continuing hunger among the American people for being innovative and being creative. It's just something that is just sort of built into our DNA as a culture. And it's a remarkable thing. And I've seen the pushback. Again, I've written an entire book about evasive entrepreneurs pushing back. I've also seen the policy pushback. And if I can sort of leave you with one thing that leaves me a lot of optimism just from a policy perspective, because it just can't be all like, we're going to bet on innovation and just hope we go for broke and the innovators break through. It doesn't always work that way. We need policy to be right. We need policy change. I'm really encouraged by things like the so-called right to earn a living movement that we've seen in a lot of states, Arizona and many others. And it's been married up to the idea of occupational licensing more generally. But it's just generally about a presumption that people do have a right to go out and pursue an honest living, to put bread on the table for their families. And to the extent there are barriers that stand in the way, we should address them. We should address them promptly. And we should have a presumption against those barriers. we should basically say that unless there's a compelling reason that we can demonstrate that they benefit society or safety or something else, then they should go, or they should at least be reevaluated on a regular timetable. That idea has gained some traction. And I'll suggest that branding matters. By calling it something like right to earn a living versus just occupational licensing reform, it just sounds a little sexier, right? I mean, we need to embrace the idea of a right to earn a living and the general freedom to tinker and the freedom to innovate. I think that's still a winning banner we can rally behind, and that I think Louisiana, if it takes that charge up and pushes and uses its resources and assets to go in that direction, I think it can benefit and then show the path forward, just like Utah, Montana, Arizona, some other states are doing, to pull people away, not just from California, but pull them away internationally. I'm still a big believer in bringing the best and brightest minds here to America, and they generally do come when asked, and do this because the opportunity for reward is still there through technological innovation and change. So I hope that's enough of a word of optimism, despite the fact that I had some pessimistic things to say. No doubt about it, permissionless innovation is under attack, like it has been in the last 25 years. But it doesn't mean the battle's yet lost. We still have a chance to push forward and benefit all Americans and everyone in the great state of Louisiana.
Yeah, we're definitely having a brain drain down here in Louisiana, one of the only southern states to lose population. We definitely need to rethink kind of our culture down here. That, like you said, the right to earn a living, who can be against that? What's more American than working hard and providing for your family? We're about to wrap up, but I want to finish with Ben. Again, we've spent a lot of this time talking about how great Utah is, but if there's one thing you could say to a Louisiana policymaker who's watching this is, they're inspired, they want to change Louisiana's course and get us going in the right direction, what would you think is the best policy change that they could make? Or is it just a mindset, right? Is it, like the mayor of Miami just sending out in the tweet and say, hey, Louisiana or Miami or Utah is open for business for innovators?
Things, and Eric and Adam have both said these better than I can, so I can be brief. But first, deregulate. You've got to have the right regulatory environment. And if you cannot create that, doesn't matter what else you're going to do. No incentive is going to make the difference for a bad regulatory environment. So get the regulatory environment right first. I think that's critical. The second, it all comes back to talent and workforce. And I think Eric said that so well. And so, as you look at being a welcoming state, and I love Louisiana. I have been to Louisiana and have had a chance to be in downtown and experience the great culture. I love Louisiana and New Orleans. And so there's so much to offer. And so I would say that growing, knowing who you want to be, but really, really creating the workforce that you need. Like, you're going to have an incredible ecosystem, but the third piece to that I would say as well is, instead of trying to necessarily go out and steal and bring others to your state, we've done that and we've had some success. So it can work, but grow your own. And I think a good regulatory environment is a really important way to do that. I think properly introducing entrepreneurship into education is a way to do that as well. Empowering people to understand what they can do, what they can, how they can innovate. But we have a lot of even high school related programs that have kids starting businesses, and we have some really good success stories. But that has to be part of who you are. And so I think it really does come back to workforce, education, training, and then also deregulation. It's those two things. And if you can get those two things right, then you really can create that tech hub that Louisiana absolutely can embrace and grow with, and complement the other wonderful things happening in the state.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to end. Again, Ajit Pai said it. You've all had such wonderful things to say about my home state of Louisiana. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really had a great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as well. And more importantly, I hope people listen to what you have to say, because there is a great path forward for Louisiana to be a tech hub, whether it's sandboxes or drones or telehealth or healthcare. We do have that opportunity. I think you've shown us what that looks like. For those of you who are watching at home, we are going to go back to the main stage. So if you click that button right over there, we will have you, and we will finish up talking about education policy. We're so excited for tomorrow for Rick Hass for AI and having a school that fits every child. I hope you heard about how important workforce and development is from our great guests, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that tomorrow. To you, see you then.